Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire. And it's still falling, it's still crawling mostly, and we're back with the last part of Book 1 of the Bonehunters, because I just finished it. All right. Yeah, the scarf is just, growing slowly, so I have like very little new to show you here. We'll see how much I get done over the weekend. I suspect maybe it'll be done by then, but probably not. Anyway, let's get into it because time is, well, not money, but precious. Cheers. Whew. Yes. So we got a lot more Karsa Orlong stuff this time round, and some are dev stuff. And I think that's one of the things we should talk about. We have like the discussions between Samar and Karsa Orlong are very, very interesting on a lot of levels. Ruth and Bud, everyone's favorite High Fist, made a very good video on the two. I'll link it below. It's great. Go watch it if you haven't. But I wanted to talk about a few of the things that they talk about. The one interesting thing that I personally find interesting is the discussion of the consequences of inventions. The consequences of progress in general, but also the consequences of specific inventions. And that's something that Karsa and Samar Dev discuss when Karsa asks her about why all her inventions are just lying around in her home. And she explains that, yeah, there's a responsibility that comes with inventing stuff, because once those things are out in the world, they are obviously no longer, yeah, it's very difficult to put them back into the box. That Pandora's box kind of metaphor comes into that as well. Now, this is obviously something that we have, that is in general something we need to talk about, think about as human beings. It's obviously something that in a lot of discussions in our real world we talk about. Once I gene manipulating or gene editing came on the table, that discussion was held in a lot of ways, and we're still talking about the idea of should we actually use these things or not. But once those technologies are out there, it's very difficult to prevent people from just using them, and I get why that is the case. On the more science fiction level, I don't know how many of you know the author Stanislav Lem, an amazing classic science fiction writer, writing always or mostly on the more philosophical end of classic science fiction, and probably internationally most famous for the book Solaris that got at least one or two international movie adaptations. One where George Clooney is just basically staring into this weird star all the time. They're not exactly similar, at least that one is not very close to the original novel. It's definitely a novel worth reading, though. But I was reminded of a very short story of his that I don't even know the English title for, because I read it in German years ago. But it's basically about this professor and talking to different visitors, one after the other, and then in the end he's talking to someone who has basically it's very I don't even know how to translate that, because I mean, obviously I read a German translation of a Polish, I think it's Polish, yeah, it's Polish, story, and he's talking about this person who calls himself the opposite of an inventor, by which he says that he's basically going back in time to make sure that dangerous inventions are not made. And the whole thing then develops into these slightly absurd, but it also deals with that question of what to do, and all the responsibility of a scientist once he comes up with an invention or a new discovery, and what to yeah, and to the problem of thinking out all the consequences of such an invention. And that is something that Samar Dev is on the one hand like aware of, but only in some ways. And that kind of leads me to that second discussion she had with Karsa Orlan, where she basically says that that talks about the freedom that movement without cost or very cheap cost would bring. And Karsa is like, no, it's not bringing freedom. And then we have that discussion between the two, and her realization that this kind of progress becomes something of a status symbol and part of the identity of people. And as someone who lives in Germany, I totally get where she's coming from, because cars are fucking holy here, and like have become something of a very integral part of the German psyche at this point, which is a huge problem, both for like environmental reasons and a lot of other reasons. But this is not me preaching about how shitty cars are, which then someone will, blame on me not being able to drive one, and that's probably also true. But the general consequence of what free movement brings, or what technical discoveries bring, and their consequences for the environment and the world at large, even for people that are like not even connected to the people that originally discover something, a piece of technology or whatever. That is something that we we as people who live in a society where technological progress and scientific progress are the maxim, and have been ever since like the 1500s, basically. Once again, I come back to my good friend Francis Bacon, who wrote that Novum Organon that I spoke about, and that, yes, comes to that point where you start to invent things, enslave the world around it, and by binding it into rules and so forth. And that, obviously, I think the third part in that like conversations is the one that she has with the torturer, that Samar Dev has with the torturer while she is dissecting the Kachain Jamal, short-tailed Kachain Jamal. And we also learn that it has mechanical things in its stomach, which I find interesting and cool. The sci-fi nature of the Kachain Jamal is, in any case, extremely good. But there, the discussion of like what torture does and how torture is justified and or not justified, and that it actually, for him as someone who does the job, it's not so much about discovering the truth or like those small truths that people are tortured for when like intelligence gathering, but he's more on the level of trying to find out things about the nature of the universe and the nature of life, which has a lot of dark subtext. And this is like what you find there, or at least I found there when you think about it. It's like because he's always claiming that he is he and Samar Dev are very similar, and he might see something there that she's vehemently denying, right? But when you look at the fact of how much how many of our current medical and biological and so forth progress, how much of that progress is, at least in part, based on knowledge gained through very, very problematic, totally immoral experimentation, right? You have like you can technically start with the idea of animal testing for all kinds of medicine. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of pro animal testing or contra animal testing discussions. I'm not an expert on that one. I have an opinion, I believe in almost all cases animal testing is not necessary, and I hope that technology will make it obsolete at some point. But I don't want to discuss that aspect here. The point there is that this is still like one of the more moral aspects of this immoral basis for a lot of progress that brings good to the world, right? But then you have the idea of experiments on humans that were made by several brutal terror regimes, whether those were like socialist or fascist regimes. It's not the question of those, but yes, a lot of like medical progress of the 20th century is based on stuff that was found out under horrible conditions and morally wrong conditions in German concentration camps and in camps in other like dictatorships. And that is a fact that people it's a fact that is very difficult to come to terms with if you're trying to be a morally good person or have sound morals. But some of the stuff you're working on is based on very sordid information that is already there. And then you ask yourselves like, do I take these this information that was gotten under absolutely wrong circumstances and use it for something good? Do I make myself guilty at the same time, and so forth? And the discussion between the torturer and Samar Dev is exactly what made me think about these kinds of discussions, because he's always claiming that, and she is that they are basically looking for the same things and the same questions. And she is vehemently denying that. And you could read it as him being sort of the dark side of science gone too far, and Samar Dev trying to be the morally sound scientist, being aware of the responsibilities that come with scientific knowledge and the gaining of scientific knowledge and all of that. But then at the end, she talks to Karsa Orlong, and he shows her like even more consequences that she wasn't even aware of. Including the question whether progress itself is a virtue, whether progress itself is something worthwhile, or if not all progress is a good thing. I do have problems with that discussion myself, moral problems with that, like ethical problems with that. I believe in general that progress is a good thing. In general, always. The question, however, is of how to use that progress, and that's the rub right there, because the question that a lot of scientists will claim is that science by itself is a neutral discipline. It's just the pursuit of knowledge. The question is that the case, or does like the gaining of knowledge automatically bring with it moral responsibilities that scientists are often, at least very often, depending on the discipline you study, are not exactly prepared for today in their studying, right? I studied computer science for a while. You don't get an ethics of computer science course at university unless you specifically look for one, are very, very lucky that your university is offering one. I guess it's a bit better with medicine, if you're studying medicine, or maybe biology. I'm not quite sure. Like probably also pharmacology. If you study one of those disciplines, yes. But is there a mandatory class for ethics in physics when you study physics? I don't think so. Would it be helpful? Definitely, because if you actually decide to make new inventions, you should at least know how to argue and think in the ways of ethics, right? Wouldn't that be like really helpful? Because maybe a gut decision is not always the best way to go about moral decisions. I mean, it's probably in a lot of our everyday decisions, we just go by gut feeling. At least most people do, I imagine. Like intuition is very helpful there, but when it comes to the moral ramifications of a scientific discovery, that one maybe should like get a bit more thought, and maybe it would really help if the people that understand the the scientific element of that would also have at least the basic training to do the moral reasoning about it, because otherwise we have a problem. And Samar Dev is discovering the fact that we have that problem right now. So that was my preaching about Samar Dev and Karsa Orlong for today. Well, the scene with him, with Karsa Orlong eating hemorrhoid cream is obviously just really funny, as are a lot of others in there. That discussion about the Bocarala dropping fruit or a brick on people. There's a discussion to be had on legality and customs and stuff in there as well that I am not prepared to do to have today. What else do we need to talk about? Well, a bit of a structural thing that I felt inclined to talk about is the way Igatan is built up in the novel so far, because we know there's going to be a battle in Igatan. We see that. We see all these paths converging on that. Once again, converging is a bit of a problem in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Everything converges all the time, and once convergences happen, things get hairy. In this case, I wanted to talk more about how Stephen Erickson manages to build up that threat of that shadow, that dark threat of Igatan over time. You have these different quotes and poems at the openings of chapters, and Igatan gets mentioned there with to imbue that sense of the place, of how important it is within the within Seven Cities culture, within recent history, and so forth. We get all of that through those things. Then you have people talking about it, remembering what happened before, and so forth. And I find this very really compelling and done really well, because by the time we actually reach Igatan in the novel, or the Bonehunters finally arrive there, the 14th Army finally arrives at Igatan, right? We already are just as freaked out by that city and expecting doom and something terrible to happen, just like the soldiers in the army do expect there. And that's what I mean by the way how this sense of threat is slowly built up through all these conversations. We see how the army is still, not falling apart yet, but definitely tempers are wearing thin. You have all these ridiculous things going on when they're at the camp there. The one team dismantling that wagon because they're pissed off by it, and others just fighting and brawling, and everyone is just, tempers are frayed. Everyone is scared shitless by Igatan, and at least I, as a reader, feel I'm also scared by what will happen in Igatan at this point, because it's just built up so well, this tension through all these different aspects of it, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say here. So that's just really, I'm just saying I'm appreciating what is going on there. All right. What else do we need to talk about? Mapo and Ikariam, of course. Seems I did not remember anything when I made yesterday's video, because apparently that dead dragon is not what's powering the damn Skykeep. It just turned up there because shadows and shit. And it was maybe killed by Tist Edur. Who knows? I'm more confused than ever now, but yeah, apparently the dinosaur spaceship is flying with other technology. It doesn't need a dragon to power it. But it's once again one of those things where we realize that obviously, or not obviously, but apparently, I mean, we get a closer look at how the whole pantheon war within the pantheon is like falling out, and that there's no neutral sides anymore. It's like everyone has to sort of choose a side. The crippled god has forced that, which obviously, on the other hand, Captain Paran, or no longer Captain, but Gano as Paran, has basically forced that because he's the one who sanctioned the crippled god, and now the crippled god has to abide by the rules of the whole thing there, the rules of the deck of dragons, or the overarching power structure of the Malazan world. So yeah, that's just fine. Um, this time around, like, this is so also well done. It's like, the way that Ikariam in that place realizes that he has this terrible past. He realized that he must have done something bad, and he realized that Mapo knows and doesn't want to tell him, and so forth. And he decides, this time around, Ikariam decides to go and face his past, and in this case, he seems to be more aware of the brutality of his past. He doesn't know, obviously, how fucked up it is, but he is aware of the fact that it's really brutal, and he wants judgment. Now, he also wanted something similar before entering Tremolo, and Mapo knocked him out and dragged him with him because he didn't want to lose his friend. But this time around, Mapo seems to be, well, he's still pondering how to deal with it when they get ambushed by someone sent by the Nameless Ones. Now, obviously, we know that the Nameless Ones also sent, put Mapo into the role of companion to Ikariam, but apparently ending that relationship is not he just gets dismissed or fired. It's more like it's more like special service, where you just try to get rid of your employees with sensitive information in a more final way, right? And that is what happens there when when we end the book, book one, with Mapo falling off that cliff, which is so fucking sad. I mean, it's Mapo and Ikariam is one of the plot lines that really, really, really gets me every time. I'm not saying which one of the two I feel more akin to here. But yes, this one just that hits every time I'm reading it. Their story, like I've read it, like I'm reading it the third time now, and it still hits me every time. So there's that. What else would be interesting about the stuff that I read today? Well, I don't know about the whole plot line with Felicin, Solara, Cutter, Grey Frog, and Heboric. For some reason, it doesn't really, get. I don't know how. It doesn't connect well with me, is what I'm trying to say here. It's like I get what it's doing and all of that. I do kind of mostly understand like the reflections of Silara when she's thinking about her pregnancy and stuff like that. That is a vital thing to talk about. I just have difficulties connecting with that bit for some reason. I guess we should also at least talk a bit about Apsala and what's her name, Captain Paran, when they meet. Well, they meet. We don't know what they talked about, but it's certainly an interesting conversation they have there. I'm almost certain about it. But yes, book one ends also with the fact that apparently plague has come to Seven Cities, and not just any plague, but the big one, with the goddess right behind it. Poliel is in Seven Cities. which we are basically told is part of the crippled god's plan, because we know that she works with the crippled god. She joined him already at the end of Memories of Ice, so there's something gonna happen there. Yes, I don't know if that's all I think that's all I wanted to talk about today. Maybe I'll remember more things tomorrow. I feel like tomorrow we're only going to talk about one chapter, because I looked ahead in chapter 7, like chapter 1 of book 2 is ginormous. The audiobook said it's like 4.5 hours, so that's similar to like the last chapter in Memories of Ice. That's just huge, and I feel that's roughly enough. I can like around 4 hours, 4 to 5 hours is roughly what I can read in a day and still kind of talk about coherently. So I guess we'll leave it at that tomorrow. And if I remember anything that I forgot today, then I'll just pick it up as well. Until then, have a great Wednesday. I'll talk to you tomorrow about more bone hunting. Until then, cheers.